Morning, everyone. Really excited to be here today. First real opportunity. So you may get a lot of information from us. We haven't talked a lot about our portfolio of projects and how we're developing our projects. So this is kind of my first opportunity after 2.5 years down in the trenches, working hard to develop these projects and to roll them out and talk about them. So I'll try to be brief if I can, but you'll have to understand we have a lot of passion about what we're doing and what we're doing for the environment. So Peter asked me to talk about several things today, but first I wanted to introduce Fidelis and who we are to the folks, because you probably don't know who Fidelis New Energy is. So I start with kind of the mom and apple pie sort of things. What business are we in? And we're in the carbon reduction business. We are seeking to develop, build, own, and operate carbon negative infrastructure and create climate positive impacts. And that's who we are. I love the fact that Jen brought safety up. I'm classically trained as an engineer. I spent 30 years building, operating, and maintaining assets. Have a tremendous passion and focus on safety, both process safety and industrial safety. So it's hard to ever see a meeting start without talking about safety. So thanks for bringing that up, Jen. But we're kind of a different animal. Our team comes from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different places. Our core team actually cut their teeth in infrastructure investment, making significant investments in infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit about some of those investments here shortly. But we're also a mix of engineers and project managers and chemists and process engineers and electrical engineers that come together with the finance folks to develop projects that make a difference. So we see ourselves as a pure play decarbonization infrastructure business. When you think about the life cycle we've been through, for the first, up until 2010, the focus was on efficient production from the fossil resources that were available to us. And that's what delivered the quality of life and the great economic expansion that most of us have experienced over the last 50 years. Then beginning in the early 2000s into 2010, you saw the emergence of the offset-focused companies that were then looking to expand in things like wind and solar and looking to change the way their portfolio looked from an impact potential. We see ourselves working in the next era of this enterprise and as a pure play, carbon negative, climate positive business. We don't have a bias in existing legacy assets. A lot of folks do. That's not a bad thing. And some folks are doing some great things to maximize the transition of those legacy assets. That's just not what we focus on. We focus on greenfield assets. We don't carry forward any legacy bias. We focus only on opportunities to create truly carbon negative products, whether it's transportation fuels or intermediate products. That's our focus. So in order to develop a portfolio for sustainability, you have to start with being able to develop a portfolio. And that may sound like an easy lift, but it's not. Our experience over the last 10 years has been deeply rooted in developing portfolios across multiple industries, everything from midstream product transportation and distribution to electrical transportation, transmission and distribution, even the first project financed butane 1 facility ever developed in the United States. So we're infrastructure investors at heart. That means all of our projects are focused on proven technologies. We don't take any technology risk. Developing a project is hard enough. Developing technology is hard enough. Trying to develop technologies and projects at the same time is nearly impossible. So we focus on proven technologies at or near the scale that we want to build. We focus on scale. We're not building teapots. We're building real refineries, real projects, large scale. The growing gigasystem that I'll speak about shortly, that's why we call them gigasystems. These are gigaton CO2 engines. These are engines that can reduce CO2 emissions in the giga scale to the tune of 4 million tons per year of CO2 eliminated from the atmosphere through our first grown ecosystem. So we focus on scale, we do things large, but we also do them in a fairly infrastructure conservative mindset, which means we like to have contracted offtakes for our products. We tend to work with EPC partners that can provide us price and performance certainty, and technology partners that are well proven in the industry that they work in. So the way we changed our view and what we deployed to allow us to develop these projects this way is our proprietary RACER framework. And RACER is kind of our internal operating system for developing projects. And it's an acronym. We all love acronyms. So it starts with R, which is rational. And from our perspective, that means economically rational, not in the traditional context of economically rational. It's not just about overnight capital cost or project efficiency, but rational through the lens of carbon intensity and the value of carbon intensity reduction, and how the value of that carbon intensity reduction plays into the values that our customers, the folks that will buy the products that our plants produce, the folks that partner with us on offtakes, how that's valuable to them. It requires a little bit of a change in mindset. It requires us to work with our engineering partners to think differently about payback period and what's contemplated in how we look at our projects. The second letter is A for all inclusive. So this is not scope 1 or scope 2 or scope 3. This is all scopes, right? So we're looking up and down the supply chain. We look at everything from the logistics of our feedstocks into our plants to the transportation of the products that are leaving our plants. I mean, our products, especially our transportation fuels, are valued typically on a low carbon fuel standard basis or a RIN basis. And those pathways are comprehensive. They are tip to tail. And so all inclusive means thinking about all of those carbon impacts, the carbon impacts that we have inside our plant as well as our supply chain on both ends, energy consumption, water use and reuse. So lots of integration opportunities and lots of ways to think about how we can be all inclusive in evaluating our development processes. Continuous. This is the one that's hard for us engineers, right? We really love to kind of lock in and lock down. Tell me what you want to build, boss, and let me build it. It doesn't work that way in this environment. We're constantly seeking the best outcomes that we can seek. We're constantly trying to develop assets that will survive over the long haul. Assets that have what we refer to as moats around these assets. These moats allow our assets to produce and prosper when other assets won't be able to keep up. And so that's the continuous component of this. Environmental impact reduction, the E and the R, again, comprehensive, looking at all scenarios where we impact the environment. We have an analog for this, which I'll talk about in a minute, is our RACER framework for DE&I. In our RACER framework for DE&I, we replace environmental impact reduction with equitable ramp. And our objective through our DEI framework is to create that equitable ramp for all of the communities that we work in, for all the people that work on our projects, and for all the people that use our products that come from our projects. So a lot of time on RACER, but this is kind of our DNA. And I'll talk about how that works for us and how we tie that into building a portfolio for sustainability. So what we've done over the time is, we went out and developed RACER trying to do what we thought was right. And then we look backwards at what other people think is right. And we look back at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And what we found was that if you're really focused on doing the right things, it's real easy to understand and make connections to and ties to all of those Sustainable Development Goals. Each one of our projects touches every one of these Sustainable Development Goals in some way or another. When you first start looking at some of these goals, you think, okay, how can a project in Port Allen, Louisiana, that's making renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and bio-naphtha help prevent poverty? Well, it can in so many ways. In ways they're dealing with the poverty that exists right there in that own community. Also in our choices of feedstocks, by not choosing feedstocks or creating feedstock flexibility that allows us to not be dependent on feedstocks that harm food supply feedstocks. So looking at all those alternatives, having the most flexibility in feedstocks. So again, throughout all 17 of those goals, you can look for those direct ties, and we think about our RACER framework as how we achieve those sustainability goals that are identified by the United Nations. So now this is where I get passionate, is around the project factory. Again, I'm a managing director at Fidelis, but I'm also the chief projects officer. And so we execute all of our projects through a portfolio management office. And so we work very closely with our investment team members to go through this infrastructure delivery model. So it starts with picking good markets, right? It's very difficult. I did a lot of wind and solar development. I love wind and solar folks. They work really hard on very thin margins. Those projects are difficult. They live and die on single-digit changes in overnight capital costs. Not sure I really want to do much of that. So we pick good markets. We want to pick markets that are attractive and that are creative and markets that want us there. Next, we think about project scoping and what projects do we want to build that tackle those markets? How do we want to be in those markets? Where do we want to play in those markets? The next thing we go through is our development cycle. We also work through our financing processes. Again, we are an infrastructure investor at heart. We tend to own and operate our own assets, but all of our projects are non-recourse project finance, which means our projects have to stand on their own and pass muster with our debt providers as well as our equity players. And then how do we deliver those projects? What is our process for making sure we work those projects through development, into delivery, and ultimately into operations, where we can then continue to optimize those assets over time? So I think everybody's seen the traditional influence curve, and most folks will tell you that the way to attack the influence curve is to spend a lot of money up front and do a lot of engineering. At least when I was selling engineering services, that's what I told a lot of people. What we found is, yeah, there's some value in doing a lot of front-end engineering. There's also a lot of value in tackling a lot of the other binary risk associated with project development. So that's what we tend to do. Development dollars are extremely precious. The time and energy we spend in developing these projects up front before we get to FID needs to be on the right stuff. We need to focus on the right things. The right things for us are things like selecting a great market, picking a good technology, a technology that is a market leader, a technology that has a balance sheet behind it, right? So we spend our time working on those things, making sure that we have line of sight to our permits, spending time and energy on doing enough design on our emissions profiles, doing enough design to make sure that we can get our projects permitted. I dare to say we probably have the only 70,000 barrel a day refinery in the United States that's permitted under a minor source air permit. That took a lot of energy, a lot of effort, a lot of capital, but we've done that. So that's one of the binary risks we try to move. And then the balance of those permitting issues, we also need to know how much the project's going to cost. We absolutely have to get certainty around cost and performance of our projects before we reach our final investment decision. So we spend time stair-stepping the risk of these projects down on the front end, doing enough design, enough work to make sure that we've taken all of the binary risks out and that we have a successful project going forward. So that's how we tackle the influence curve. This is the organization that I look after. I'm fortunate enough to have some really great team members on this organization. But this is how we're organized to deliver our projects. We have an engineering function which handles development engineering, design engineering, classic engineering functions. We have our project delivery function which delivers the projects. But we also support the asset performance management function out of our portfolio management office. So our job and our goal, which is kind of the mission on the next slide, is we're really responsible for taking that investment thesis and working it through the development cycle, all the way through project delivery, and then on into asset performance. Again, we've been at this for about 2.5 years as Fidelis New Energy. We're actually approaching final investment decision on our first gigasystem, the Grown Gigasystem, which I'll talk about shortly. And so we're working our way through those processes. And again, I'm kind of an asset management geek. I spent a lot of my career where I got to know the folks here at ARC Advisory Group. We like to think about our delivery model in the context of the asset anatomy, and how we deliver projects is kind of tied into that. I could spend hours on how we're developing our operating system with respect to this. I won't bore you with that. I'll move on. But it's a big part of how we're navigating from project development through project delivery and on into asset operations and maintenance, and how we're going to complete that cycle and keep going, preserve knowledge, build great organizations, have a focus on safety, keep D&I at the forefront, and make sure we do it all in a digital way. So our 4 sectors and gigasystems, I'll try to fly through some of this. I don't want to take the whole session up. But for us, what is a gigasystem? So I'll talk about the Grown Fuels gigasystem as kind of the starting point. Grown Fuels gigasystem is our gigasystem in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's the one that will reach final investment decision in the 3rd quarter of this year. It's a roughly nameplate 60,000 barrel a day renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and bio-naphtha plant. It uses fats, oils, and greases as feedstocks, plant-based and animal-based. It has its own green hydrogen plant, so we're tightly integrated there and produce a truly low carbon solution for transportation fuels. When we couple that grown fuel system with our Capio sequestration portfolio company, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit, that allows us to go to the next step and get into the low single digits in carbon intensity. By capturing the CO2 primarily from our hydrogen, our SMR, capturing that CO2, compressing it, cleaning it, sending it in a pipeline, and permanently sequestering it in our sequestration areas that we've cooperated with the state of Louisiana on, that allows us to get to low single digits carbon intensity. The next leg down is by implementing our biomass carbon negative power plant with carbon capture and storage. At this point, the transportation fuels produced by the grown facility will be carbon negative. We have clear pathways identified that have been supported. We'll be basically supplying carbon negative transportation fuels in 2025, early 2026 from the grown fuels facility, once Cyclist and Capio are on board. So that's how a gigasystem works. And so that's our definition, and this is the grown fuels gigasystem. So we have other opportunities in other manufacturing sectors. Over on the left side of the screen, you see the grown. You'll also see reference to Hytera, which is our clean hydrogen, hydrogen derivatives gigasystem. And you kind of see how the Cyclist and the Capio systems play into that. So having the pore space, having the proven capacity to sequester CO2 in deep saline aquifers in Louisiana adjacent to these facilities is a key cog. The great news is that the Grown Fuels Project and Cyclist produces about 4 million tons of CO2 that's capturable from our projects alone. That pretty much serves as the underwriting case for our Capio investment. So we'll make our Capio investment, and then ultimately that pore space may also be used by other third parties who are looking to decarbonize their operations as well. And then we're a big believer in all forms of energy that can be direct tied to our plants that offer carbon negative or at least carbon neutral power. There's just not a lot of places to put windmills inside of refineries. There's not a lot of places to put solar panels inside refineries. And believe it or not, the payback is huge. We are putting about 4.5 megawatts, maybe, it depends on what we do, somewhere between 2 and 4 megawatts of solar inside the facility in the right spaces, but it's a no-brainer. It's a slam dunk for us. Nobody else who's tied to the low carbon fuel standards are even thinking about these sort of things. It goes back to RACER and making the right decisions based on RACER. So there are 4 pillars of our climate gigasystem: the renewable fuels, the carbon capture, carbon management operation, the biomass power with carbon capture, and ultimately our Hytera, which is our blue hydrogen, hydrogen derivatives business. One of the things that Peter suggested we talk about, which is really important, you heard it from the panel this morning, is partnering. Look, we've got 40 people with a lot of experience on our team, but we're just 40 people. At different points in time, we've had probably close to 600 people working on the development of Grown, and it's been by cooperating with partners, really great partners. We can't do this by ourselves. We don't have all the answers. And so we look for really outstanding partners, our technology partners. We've chosen Topso for our Hydroflex and our hydrogen bridge technologies. We've chosen Alfa Laval for our pre-treatment units. We've chosen ABB and Yokogawa for energy management and our digital control systems. We're working closely with Koch at multiple levels. Koch Solutions and Koch OPD will be our EPC contractor. We also worked early on with Worley and Advisian as our engineering partner. And then it goes on through our transportation partners. Sitting down and talking about how we're going to get feedstocks into our plant in the most carbon impact resistant way we can, right? So how are we bringing these things in? Deep water vessels, rail. It's one of the great things about our grown site. We have all those options available to us. Pipeline, unit train rail, shallow water barge, deep water ship, all available to us. One of the great things about the site that we have. So partnerships are key. We can't do it by ourselves. We have great partners. We lean on our partners heavily, and they make us better. I've talked a little bit about the operating segments. I'll blow through this. Obviously, I think this materials will be available after the fact, but the grown fuels, Capio, Cyclist, and Hytera are our 4 operating segments. Happy to speak about any of that offline if anybody's interested. The last thing I want to talk about before I leave is our digital strategy. So when we first started down this path, I guess almost, we've been at it 2.5 years. I reached out to my contacts at ARC Advisory Group and said, okay, look, we've got to get back in touch and get our current thinking and current understanding of the digital aspects of the business back up to speed. We need to understand what's going on in the marketplace, what's important, who has the right solutions, what should we be thinking about. And ARC did a great job, and Peter did a great job of helping us frame and understand what we need to be thinking about with respect to our digital vision and who we should be working with. Then we started thinking about our partners and who we were going to work with. So as we think about the role of digital in improving facility and performance, we actually set up a set of best practices that we thought we wanted to try to accomplish. And again, an old mentor of mine, Peter Freeman, used to tell me, you really can't know best practices until you've seen worst practices. So, we come with a lot of scar tissue, a lot of things that went well for us as individuals. We rely on our partners. We rely on peers in the industry to tell us what they're seeing and what really are the best practices. And we try to document what our expectation is about the plant. And I use this phrase a lot, right? So back when I was working in industry and I had to go through transformation projects, I thought, well, that was really hard. It's really hard to take an older organization and bend it and change it and make it something new. Have a blank slate. Try to start from scratch, right? So the good news is I don't have a legacy organization that I have to change. The bad news is I have nothing. So we have to start from scratch on every front. Policies, procedures, plans, workflows, roles, responsibilities, all of it from scratch. Again, working with great partners is the key. So we started documenting that stuff. We're 3 years away from turning on the plant. But we have to start right now thinking about how we're going to run the plant so that we can affect the design for that plant early on. We've got our partners with us right now that ultimately will be playing roles in our ERP systems, in our digital systems, in our asset performance management systems, in our control systems, so that we design these plants correctly up front so we're ready to operate them when the time comes and operate them with the lowest carbon footprint we can operate them. So again, we think about all of the different functions and that nice universe looking emblem there on the left side are all the different functions that grown fuels will have to have. Thinking about how we understand that organization and how that's going to connect inside our digital topology. And then the folks that have partnered with me on digital, they'll expect the next reference that's coming. That results in what I refer to as my Waffle House menu. It's all the things that we're going to do to make sure that we are successful from a digital perspective and who's in charge of each one of those functions and zones. So we have great partners, again, like ABB and Yokogawa and KBC and GE Digital, Infor, all leaning in. And what we ask them to do is bring your experience, bring your best practices, bring your best, and lean in and go with us on this journey as we develop this portfolio for sustainability. So that's my presentation for today, and look forward to the panel of questions.